Record. Okay, so we've had a chance to look at our quick little video, just a brief overview of the Division of Fish and Wildlife, and we work on a variety of projects covering a wide range of species. So that's why we're happy to have that video, because it kind of gives you a condensed view in just a couple of minutes of all the things that we do. It used to take us like 10 minutes, 15 minutes of the presentation to start explaining everything and how our funding sources work. But the main source of our funding is through that wildlife and sport fish restoration program. That's pretty much our sole source of funding. So as you can imagine, white-tailed deer are a very important species to us at the division, because many people like to hunt deer. So that's a big source of revenue, not only to support the deer program, but to support many other programs, including land acquisition. So if we can skip ahead. So we have quite a few management areas around the state, and you can see them here in green in our map. So most of them are in the western half of the state. We've got a few over on the East Bay, but that comprises about 60,000 acres of land. So that 60,000 acres is shared between Fish and Wildlife and the Division of Forest Environment. And some of those are solely designated as wildlife management areas. So something like the Great Swamp down in South Kingstown or West Kingston is an example of that that wildlife and sport fish restoration funding put to great use. So that's 3,600 acres of land that was purchased with those funds. So that's a great chunk of habitat that's been conserved, not only for game species and to provide hunting and fishing opportunity for the public, but also just for everything that lives there. So I like to say everything from deer to dragonflies will benefit when we conserve land. So that's a big part of what we do, is managing that habitat and making sure that we have diverse habitat for our wildlife. And these are places that you can visit. This is public land. So I'll let Gabby talk a little bit about some of the requirements, though, when you go to visit a management area, because there's a few little caveats.
So just like Mary said, even though the funds are from hunters to purchase all that land, we still welcome everyone to come and use these areas to view all of the awesome wildlife that we have in the state. But if you do want to come visit a wildlife management area, just make sure that you're wearing your safety orange during the hunting season, which is starts in the beginning of September and goes all the way until the end of May. Right now it's still small game season, so you want to make sure that you at least have an orange hat on or an orange vest. And then during December, you want to make sure you have a hat and a vest on. You need 500 square inches of orange. So that's just it. Just make sure you have your orange on. If you're unsure, you just wear it just in case. And I also posted in the chat a link to our outdoor recreation map that has all of our properties, and you can click on it and see if it's either a management area or if it's an undeveloped state park. Then you're going to need to wear your orange. And like I said, a lot of other places also allow hunting. So just to be safe, I always just wear my orange during the winter and during that season. And that's about it. So please come and enjoy them. They're really beautiful, amazing habitat for lots of wildlife. And I think now we can jump right into deer.
Absolutely. Okay, so we love trivia. We find it is a far more fun way of disseminating information than just us blabbing at you for an hour. So we encourage you to participate in these trivia questions. You can type your answers in the chat. We'll take a couple of minutes, give you a second to answer them. Some of them are maybe pretty simple, basic questions about deer natural history, and some of them might be a little trickier. So we invite you to test your knowledge about deer. And I have a trail camera photo here. And this was taken in Rhode Island. So all of the trail camera photos that you're going to see throughout the presentation were taken as part of our bobcat study, which was a 5-year project tracking bobcats throughout the state. So we actually captured and collared and released some bobcats to track their movements. But as part of that study, they set up about 100 trail cameras around the state. And as you can imagine, you get, bobcats, but you also get everything else that walks by. So there's quite a few deer photos, and some of them are pretty humorous. So I hope you enjoy checking them out. I always enjoy trail camera photos. All right, so our first trivia question: which habitats do deer use? So we can type those answers in the chat, see what we get. Okay, so I'm seeing some answers flow in: forests, swamps, woodland, all habitats, edges of woods, thick wooded areas, everything, fields, uplands and wetlands. Which ones don't they use? Good question. Yards. Yep. So all habitats. So we pretty much hit the nail on the head right there. So deer will use a wide variety of habitats, including mixed forests. They'll use fields. If you've ever gone out in the summertime and you've seen some grass tamped down in a field where deer have bedded down, that's always an interesting clue to see that deer have been there. Forest edges, most definitely. Swamps, you can find them in swamps, believe it or not. I found some deer scat in some interesting swampy places. Thickets, backyards, absolutely. And even coastal habitats. So we've seen, deer. I found deer tracks in Succotash Marsh down in, near Galilee. Deer tracks right in the marsh muck. Deer are actually very good at swimming as well. So on the Bay Islands, we have a lot of sign of deer. Dutch Island is particularly deer laden because it's a fairly close swim. For them to get there. So I've been out there on Dutch Island for different surveys, and you can actually hear the deer moving around you because it's a pretty small island, and they get into like the tiniest little places. I was like crawling through some of the thickets on Dutch Island and finding deer scat and tracks. So they can squeeze into some small spots, which is pretty impressive for a pretty big animal. All right, I'll turn it over to Gabby.
All right, so for our next trivia question, I like this little guy, the little trail camera photo, the profile of a deer. So what do deer eat? What do you think they eat? We know where they live. What about where do they eat? You can feel free to type it into the chat. Let's see, whoa, apples, leaves, acorns, vegetation, grass, shrubs, acorn brush, acorns, white oak grass, my garden, flowers, my azaleas, yep, everything. Awesome. All right, so you guys pretty much got it. So they will eat a lot of different plants, a really big, wide variety. I've seen tons of more answers. They'll eat birdseed, yeah, they will. So they can eat up to 500 different types of plants, so a huge variety of plants. And in the fall, they're usually kind of eating more acorns. In the summer, they'll eat more grasses and anything really that's available, but they really want to bulk up on acorns in the fall to fatten up for the winter time. And they can eat up to 9 pounds of food in a day. That's a ton. And I saw in the chat, people had posted they'll eat their gardens, they'll eat, their azaleas and the plants that they planted for, their beautiful yards. But they will eat those things. And so there are a few things that you can do to protect the plants that are in your yard. I'm gonna post in the chat a link to our Reducing Deer Damage document that we have. It's not pretty, it's a little bit old, but even though it's old, it's not outdated. All of the information is still relevant. We just didn't make it look prettier yet, but we will. But it has a lot of really great information on how to protect your gardens. And one of the things is planting plants that deer don't want to eat. So some deer resistant plants. And other things involve fencing off your garden, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But there's a lot of really great information in there because we do have a really healthy deer population in the state. And we'll talk a little bit about why they're in our yards and in our gardens versus in the woods in just a few slides.
Okay, so along those lines about, deer diet and what they're eating. So it's cold out. Food is scarce right now. I saw somebody in the chat say, they'll even strip bark off of trees if they're desperate enough. One thing that they really won't eat are ferns. That's something that they do not find palatable. But they'll pretty much, they have to see what they can get, when food is scarce. So the question is, what can I feed the deer, when we're in these cold months and they maybe need a little extra help. So let's go to the chat. Nothing. Don't feed them. Nothing. Apples. Should not feed them. All right. Hey, nothing. Oh my gosh, you guys passed my test. This was a trick question. So you should not be feeding deer anything or any other wildlife in the winter or period. It's against the law to be feeding wildlife in Rhode Island. The exception is, your backyard bird feeder that's got seeds or suet. Those are appropriate foods for birds. I always tell people, do not feed bread scraps or food scraps to birds. Seeds and suet. That's it, because other things will start to make the birds sick, and it's really not great for them. I love birds, so I always do that pitch for birds. I don't want to make people feel bad for having their backyard bird feeder. But when it comes to deer, it's a big no-no. So this picture is from Colorado. It was posted by Colorado Parks and Wildlife. So this is a video a woman took in her house, luring a deer in, and she had a little snack tray for him with carrots and all sorts of things. And this is what happens when wildlife feeding goes to the extreme. So you can see that animals can get super habituated to people very quickly if they see us as a source of food, as an easy source of food. And deer, this guy looks pretty sweet, but I mean, he's got big antlers, he's got hooves. They can be dangerous. So it's always good to remember that deer are wild animals. It's great to observe them at a distance. I got my parents calling me every day, oh, the deer are walking by in the backyard. That's wonderful. But this is too close. Another thing that other than deer becoming too close to people, it can be dangerous. It can increase reliance on people, so that decreases their natural ability to provide for themselves. The biggest thing here is deer's digestion and their metabolism slow down in the winter. So they have evolved over time, because they've been white-tailed deer, as long as they've been in existence, they've been facing harsh winters. Their body has evolved to slow down in the winter. So whatever food that they do get, they digest very slowly, and that's a survival mechanism for them. So the problem is, I see people, they go to either Tractor Supply or whatever, and you see a big bag that says deer corn, and it's labeled deer corn, so therefore I must be able to feed it to deer. The problem with corn is that, you'll see deer like nibbling on corn cobs in like a cornfield over the winter. That's small amounts of corn. That's okay, and that's a natural foraging habit. The problem with feeding piles of corn is that it can actually shock the deer's system. So that slow metabolism that is, chugging along throughout the winter, all of a sudden they get flooded with carbs. And that can make them very, very sick, and that can become even fatal, causing enterotoxemia, which is just a fancy way of saying their stomach jolts and does not digest properly, and they can get very, very sick. So when we think we're helping wildlife, sometimes we can actually be harming them more than we're helping. So, that increased dependence on humans, reducing that fear, it's unhealthy for the animals. It can also spread disease. So think about it, if I have a water bottle that I drink from and then I pass it to everybody in the room, odds are someone's probably going to get sick, right? So think about all of the deer, drawing them into one pile of corn, and they're all swapping saliva and coming in close to each other. Probably not the best idea, on a disease scale. We also have issues with I won't say hunters, I say poachers, because this is not something that hunters do. This is something that poachers do, is baiting deer. So this is illegal in the state. So our environmental police have busted people multiple times for putting out deer feeders in the middle of the woods underneath their tree stand. It's not fair chase. It's not ethical hunting. So this is something that we really take seriously. So please, I ask everybody, I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, but I have family members who do this and they don't believe me. So please spread this information as widely as you can, because this is something that really harms our deer. And Gabby had posted in the chat a great article from University of New Hampshire detailing this and what it actually does to the deer's metabolism, in case you want to read more. So we encourage you to check that out. Okay, let's move on for something a little more fun and positive. Okay, Gabby, take it away.
All right. One thing I did want to mention, some people put apples in the chat. If you have an apple tree in your yard and the deer are eating the apples in your yard, you're not going to get in trouble. I just want to put that out there. So, we're not trying to get anyone in trouble. It's just intentionally feeding wildlife we want to avoid. So on a different note, how high do you think a deer can jump? Right, seeing some answers in the chat: 8 feet, 6 to 7 feet, 6 feet, 12 feet, 8 feet. Right. Give it another minute for anyone else who wants to put their number in the chat. All right, you guys are pretty good. You're pretty close. So Deer can jump 8 feet. So a couple of you did get it. So they can jump up to 8 feet high and maybe even higher. So what we say is if you want to install fencing around your garden to protect your crops, you have to make it really high. So at least 8 feet high. So you can see in the picture here, that's a fawn. You can see the little spots on its back. So that's not a high enough fence. You can see the top of it. That fawn can probably jump over that fence, and an adult deer will definitely be able to make it over that. So you definitely want to make sure it's nice and high because they're really athletic. They're amazing how high they can jump. So if you want to protect your plants, high fencing. You also want to make sure that the fence is nice and taut. We don't want any animals getting tangled up in the fence or getting caught in it at all. Then there are a couple other things in that article or that paper that I posted before, the Reducing Deer Damage, about making natural repellents and planting other kinds of plants in your garden to try to get them to steer clear of your crops that you're trying to grow and your tomatoes and everything else that's good. But one of the things that we do encourage, if you have enough space on your property, you can allow hunting. And hunting is a great way to manage the deer population, but it's not always possible. You know, in a city, you're not going to be able to have a hunter come onto your property, or if it's very small and there's not enough space around your house for a hunter. But it is a great way because it provides food for the hunter and it reduces the number of deer and it helps keep the population nice and balanced. And we'll talk a little bit more about what happened to the population and why we kind of need hunters now versus before there was that natural balance. But one of the things that you can do is provide some native plants in your garden that the deer can also feed on. So like extra food is always better if you have the space for it. But really just avoid planting any plants that the deer are going to like. That's the best way that you can do it, because if it's there and they see it and they like it, they're going to eat it. They don't know that's your like prized azalea and bush that you've been working on for years and years. They're just going to eat it. So really just try to avoid planting anything that they like. In that paper that we put in the chat before, it's a great resource. So I really encourage you to look at it.
Nice. Okay, next question. Do deer have antlers or horns? Antlers, antlers, antlers. Nobody's saying horns. All right.
They're too smart for us, Mary.
No, oh, they know about deer. We pride ourselves on tricking people. No, so you're correct. They have antlers. So the difference between antlers and horns, a horn is directly attached to the skull. So that, so if you ever see like a cow skull, those are horns, right? They grow directly with the skull. They grow with the animal their entire life, and they're covered by a sheath of keratin, which is what our hair and our fingernails are made out of. Antlers are different. They are bone, but they are not attached to the skull. They detach every year. If anybody's ever found a shed antler over the winter, then you know this firsthand. So males will grow their first set of antlers after their first year, and those new spring antlers are covered in what's called velvet. So that's just skin with blood vessels running through it. And the way the antler grows is like super cool. Gabby's going to post in the chat a link to an article that she wrote for our newsletter, Wild Rhode Island, that details how the antler grows. And it's like absolutely fascinating because it's basically like this lattice work of bone and nerves and blood cells and all this tissue that grows. And it becomes this like cool little lattice work. And the antler, when it's covered in that velvet, it's actually kind of spongy and soft. So if you were to squeeze it, it's not fully solid yet. So basically what happens is they shed the velvet in the late summer. And if you've ever seen a deer shedding that velvet, it looks kind of messy and even bloody in some cases because that has blood vessels in it, in that skin. So just before the rut, so the breeding season in the fall. And basically it's linked to like day length and testosterone levels and that annual cycle for male deer. And they'll use those antlers, throughout the fall to spar with other males to establish dominance and territory and vie for mating with females. So cool that we got them on the trail cam. But then in late winter, they'll be, and even into December, I found a beautiful shed last Christmas, the day after Christmas. I went for a hike and it was like, what? I can't believe I found this. So if you're into hiking and you really like to look for fun natural artifacts, sheds are always a really fun find, and they can be tricky to find. My dog found ours. I totally walked by it. She sniffed it out. So the antlers will shed in the way that they just, it's like a clean break from the skull, and then there's that little pad where the antlers have dropped off from, and they usually drop them one at a time. There's a great video from Vermont Fish and Wildlife. Somebody got it on a trail camera of the deer. He kind of like shakes his head and he shakes his head again, and then all of a sudden both antlers fall off. And he's like, ah! He scares himself by the antlers falling off. So they fall off pretty quickly and pretty easily. And the cool thing about antlers is the size of them depends on a little bit on the deer's age. So obviously a first year set of antlers is going to look very different than a deer that's 5 or 6 years old. But it also depends on nutrition. So even a deer that's older, if he's not getting the right amount of nutrition, he can still grow fairly small antlers. So that's just an interesting little factoid about antlers. I'm not going to go too in depth. If you really want the entire story of antlers, I highly recommend checking out Gabby's article. All right, take it away, Gabby.
All right, next one. And if you do, it's also in the article, but if you do end up going looking for antler sheds out there, just make sure that you're providing plenty of space. You don't want to try to push any deer out while you're looking for antlers, because this time of year, you know, they need rest and they need to be able to recharge and get ready for the spring. But definitely, like, I just found one. I wasn't even looking for an antler. I just walked through my backyard and there's one right there. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So I didn't find the other one. I looked, couldn't find it. So the next trivia question, how many fawns does a doe have each year? It's saying 1 to 3, 1 to 3, 2 to 3. Awesome. Nice. You guys are so good. You're all so smart. You got it. So typically, they'll have 1, but they can have 2 depending on resource availability. So if there's enough resources and the female can get plenty to eat, then she should be able to carry more. They can have triplets in rare cases, but usually it's just about, you know, 1 or 2, not typically 3. It's not unheard of. But what happens in the springtime is we get calls coming in from all over the state. I found a baby deer and it looks like it's all alone and I don't know what to do and I'm really worried about it. And you should be worried if you do see an animal alone, except, you know, fawns, because what the mother does is she'll leave for a while. She'll leave the fawn in a place that's safe typically, and she'll go out and eat, and then she'll come back and nurse the fawn, and it's okay. And the fawn will sit really, really still, and it'll make you think that it's, you know, abandoned, and you'll feel really bad, but the mom will come back. So have faith that the mom will come back. If for some reason the fawn is in a dangerous situation, like it's on a road or it actually appears injured, like you can see blood or it looks like it's a broken leg or something, you can feel free to call the wildlife clinic. So I'm going to put their number here in the chat. Nope, that's not it. So it is, sorry, the wrong thing queued up. So it's 401-294-6363, and I'm going to post it right in there so it's easy for you guys to copy. So this is the number to the Wildlife Rehabilitators of Rhode Island. And if you find an injured fawn, a fawn in a dangerous situation, then you can call them and they will definitely be able to help you. And they'll also give you some guidance and let you know if it is a situation where you should be concerned and call them and they'll come and get the fawn, or if it's a situation where you should leave it alone. But if you do see a fawn, definitely don't try to pick it up and take it home. First call that number, or you can call us if you want to, but we'll probably end up directing you to the wildlife rehabbers anyway. And we'll tell you if the situation is you need to interfere or we need to leave it alone. But that is normal. So don't be worried if you see a fawn by itself, and feel free to spread this word to everyone, because it is confusing when you see a little fawn completely alone, not moving, because they stay really, really still. So they're nice and camouflaged. It's confusing because you think that there's something wrong, but it actually is okay and it is safe and it's healthy. Only in those rare situations you want to call us and we'll take care of it and help that little fawn out. But you can see that fawn that was in the previous picture, it's got little spots on it and it looks like sun-dappled ground, and that's why they are so good at camouflaging. That's why they stay so still, so they're nice and hidden from predators. Another way that you can help out, aside from letting us know if there is an injured fawn or a fawn in a dangerous situation, is you can become a citizen scientist through this really awesome new opportunity that we have. So we have a bunch of other surveys through Survey 123, which is an app. You can either download it on your smartphone or you can just go on your desktop at home and report any sightings that you see of deer. And this is only in August and September. I'm going to put the link to our Report Wildlife page so that you can go to it and then you can report any sightings that you see. This also has a couple of other opportunities on it, one for reptiles and amphibians and one for one for deer and one for turkey. So the deer one, what the whole point of it was, is to try to figure out fawn recruitment. So how many fawns are being born each year, and then also looking at the buck to doe ratio, which is just the male to female adult ratio. So how many males are there to females in the state? So this year, since this is the first year that it's been introduced, we had 411 observations, which is awesome. And it's all thanks to just Rhode Islanders going around in August and September, taking a picture and telling us that they saw a deer. And from this, we got reports from every single city and town except for Central Falls, Warren, and Newport. So if you're from Central Falls, Warren, or Newport and you're on this call, please download this app and let us know, because we want to get reports from there, because we know they're there. We just need some reports. Or if you know anyone that lives there, you can send them this information and then they can download the app, and next summer, in the end of the summer, they can report any observations and we can get even more information to help us learn more about our deer population. We also found 540 does, so that's how many we got reported, 328 fawns, and 99 bucks. And the 2020 fawn recruitment ratio, we had 0.64, is that a 4? I'm like, I can't see, I'm so blind. 0.6 fawns per doe. So it's like, not that does were having half a fawn each, but if there were 2 does, one of them had a fawn and one of them didn't, something like that. And then the doe to buck ratio was 5.4 to 1. So for every 1 buck, there were about 5.5 does. So more does than there were bucks. And over time, this is going to give us even more information on how our deer population is doing and how many fawns they're having, how many females to males there are. So please download this app if you can, and encourage everyone you know to use it, especially people in Central Falls, Warren, and Newport, because we need reports from there. Because like I said, we know they're there, we just haven't gotten any actual reports from there yet.
All right, this is a really cool way. I love that we have these app opportunities now, because anybody can volunteer from anywhere, which is super cool. So your observations do matter, and like Gabby said, this is just our pilot year for this. So the data that we get is, it's data, but it's not like this is the data. So we're gonna look at this over a span of years. Our deer biologist is gonna analyze this over time. So it may change over time. It may be it may increase, decrease. We don't know. So we're gonna see. So this is actually important data that you contribute. It's not busy work. So,
no, we actually need this data. And someone just posted in the chat, it wants you to make it's saying the Survey 123 app wants me to create an account. You shouldn't have to report the observation. I don't even have an official account. I just still report it like without an account. You shouldn't have to. And like I said, you can do it on your smartphone as an app, or you can do it on your PC, and it's just RI Summer Deer Survey. That's what it's called. But it's not, you won't actually be able to report any observations until August and September, because that's the only time when the survey windows open. So that's when we're collecting that data.
All right. Jump forward a little bit. Okay, so how can you tell a deer's age? We're saying like a precise age. Curious to see the answers. All right, answers are flowing in. I'm seeing pretty much across the board teeth. Yes. Wow. I can't trick you people. You guys are too good. So yes, absolutely, their teeth. So if you're not familiar with deer teeth, they're actually pretty funky looking. So we've got like a little diagram here of what a deer's jawbone, the lower jaw, looks like. So they have incisors here in the front that are actually pretty sharp, and they're kind of like pokey little tine-like teeth. And if you looked at the top of the deer's skull, you would not see those incisors. So their top of their mouth is just a hard palate. So when they're eating, they're going to be tearing food and kind of, using those bottom teeth to kind of pin it up against the roof of their mouth, and they rip the branches or the leaves or whatnot. This is different from rabbits because rabbits have teeth on the top and the bottom, so they kind of like snip like a pair of scissors. So that's a fun test when you're out in the field to see if you see any browsed twigs, see if you can figure out what animal might have browsed them. They have this big gap here in the front of their mouth called a diastoma. So if you want to impress your friends with a fun Scrabble word, diastoma is always a good one to throw out there. And then they also have premolars and molars. So believe it or not, there's actually 6 teeth here. And it's kind of tricky to see, but we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. They kind of all run together. And the way that we age them based on their teeth is through wear and tear and the presence or absence of teeth. So when you have a young deer, a fawn, we'll look and we'll see, so this one right here, 4 to 7 months old, you can only count 1, 2, 3, 4 teeth. So this back tooth has not yet come out. So they'll be missing some teeth when they're just a little baby. And then even so, like at 17 months old, this tooth is still not fully grown in yet. And you'll also see the cusps on the teeth too. So we can see on this one, it's still kind of worn down a little bit, but you can see 1, 2, 3 cusps. So usually that premolar, that third premolar that has 3 cusps, that's usually a younger deer. So in this example, 17 months old. And then it gets pretty subjective. So we won't go through this all, but basically what you're looking at is these back molars and the amount of wear that you see on the back molars. So there's they have enamel, so that's the white part of the tooth, and then they have what's called dentin, that's a brown, almost like the filling of the tooth, the inner core of the tooth. So what we look at is the ratio of enamel to dentin. And as you get more and more dentin, that indicates that the deer is older because they only get 1 set of teeth, really. And, there's no baby teeth that they lose or whatever. They've got that 1 set of teeth. And this is pretty much the truth for all ruminants or ungulates. So ungulates are hoofed animals. Ruminants are animals that chew their cud. So the deer are not only chewing down that grass and those twigs and acorns. Can you imagine chomping down on an acorn, how strong your teeth would have to be and how much wear and tear those are going to take over the course of your life? Get that 1 set of teeth to do that. And then what ruminants do is they actually spit up their food out of their 4-chambered stomach, and they chew it again because there's so much fiber and structure to plants that they have, in order to digest it, they have to chew it twice and kind of break it down. So what we'll look at, we've got one all the way up to 5.5 years old. As you get into like the 6, 7, even 8-year-old range, these teeth are going to look like little flat bowls almost as they wear them down. And you can even get, it depends on, it can be tricky with the aging because it can be subjective. So if I look at this and I say, okay, yeah, it looks about, yeah, maybe I'll guess 4.5. Gabby might say, no, I think it's 3.5, based on that subjective look. We have a different perspective. So the most accurate way to age a deer is actually by taking out one of the incisors. And we do this every year at our deer check stations. So we have 5 check stations across the state that we operate during the first 4 days of the muzzleloader season. So that's typically the first weekend of November and then the Monday, Tuesday after that. And hunters, regardless of whether you hunted muzzleloader, archery, you have to bring in your deer, and we check that deer. So we weigh it, we measure the antlers, we take a look at the teeth. So we'll kind of get an eyeball age on the teeth, and then what we'll also do is take out that one of the front incisors and send it off to a lab. And what they do is they cut a cross section of the tooth. And when you look at a tooth from above, pretty much all mammal teeth are like this. You can look at what's called cementum annuli. So if you've ever looked at a cross section of a tree and you've seen the rings, the growth rings in the tree, teeth do the same thing. So you can get an age. If you look at it under a microscope, that cross section of the tooth, we can get a really accurate age of that animal. So the aging with the, by sight, that's kind of a quick assessment, and usually it's interesting for the hunters as well to learn the age of the deer, and that gives us a lot of data on age and sex ratios of the deer that are being harvested out of the population. So this is something, if you are interested in this, if you like to dissect things, if you like to get up close and personal and you're not squeamish, if you're comfortable being around hunter harvested deer, this is a volunteer opportunity, and we take volunteers every year to help out with this. So we welcome your participation if this is something that you'd like to help us out with, or if you have experience with aging deer. If you're a hunter and you want to help us out, that's great. Another thing that we do at the check stations is check for disease. So we've been monitoring for chronic wasting disease in Rhode Island for a number of years now. And as you can see across the country, you can see all these red splotches here. This is where chronic wasting disease has been confirmed. So as close as New York. So it is fairly close to us. So this is a concern. And as you can see, this deer looks very unhealthy, right? You can see its ribs, hip bones, everything. So this is not a healthy deer. So the history of chronic wasting disease, if you're not familiar with it, it was first found in the 1960s in Colorado in captive bred deer. So there are game farms out west where they've got lots of deer in pens and whatnot. So it's thought that it escaped from those captive facilities out into wild deer in 1981. So we've been surveying for this in Rhode Island since 2002. And basically what chronic wasting disease is, it's a neurological condition that causes lesions on the brain and affects the nervous system, and essentially the body wastes away. So there's just a complete atrophy of the muscles. They lose the control of their bodily functions. And it's just a horrible, horrible way to suffer and die. And there is no cure for it so far. So we do not want this to hit Rhode Island, just because it will devastate our deer population, because we have fairly decent density here in the state. It's a small state too. Right now, they don't see any evidence of danger to humans so far, but there is that concern that if a hunter harvests a deer that is infected with chronic wasting disease, it's not showing any signs yet because it could take a while for a deer to get to this emaciated state. If they consume that meat, is that going to affect their own health? So there's a bunch of research being done to check that out, just to be sure. But really, no signs are pointing to its effect on humans yet. Obviously, we do not want it to get to that point. So the way that we test for chronic wasting disease is we ask the hunters if it's okay if we extract lymph nodes from either side of the esophagus. And most hunters are very happy to provide us with those samples, which we're grateful for, and we send those out to a lab for testing. Another test that we are enacting right now, we just started in 2020, was taking blood samples to test for triple E, because triple E has become a lot more prevalent here in Rhode Island, so we're trying to keep an eye on that. So disease monitoring is a big portion of our deer program, and it's something that is really fascinating. It's a huge part of wildlife management right now, because you got to make sure that your populations are healthy in order to continue moving forward. So that's a really interesting and kind of scary. Some people are really interested in disease and they find it fascinating. So if this is something, again, that interests you, we encourage our volunteers, when you come out to the check stations, we'll give you that opportunity to extract the lymph nodes if you're comfortable with it. So sign up for deer check stations, plug in our volunteer program. All right, I'll turn it over to Gabby.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I also love deer check stations. It's one of my favorite times of year. But again, as Mary said, you have to not be squeamish for it. But it's really interesting because you do learn how to age deer, just like Mary was talking about. You learn how to remove those lymph nodes, kind of like a scavenger hunt, finding the lymph node in there. And then you're also contributing to science. So it's a really great opportunity, really interesting. I saw a couple of questions in the chat. So one of them is about hunting and is shooting a buck versus shooting a doe, which we'll talk a little bit more about in just a couple of slides. But the other question was, how do you age a deer if it's still alive? So it's really, you have to have the teeth to really get an accurate age on it. The only other thing that you'd be able to tell the difference between is just a fawn and an adult. So the fawns usually have those little spots on them, and they'll be a little bit smaller, and they have kind of like a shorter little nose. They look really cute, like a little cuter nose. That's how I describe it. And then other than that, the adults is really hard to tell the age just by looking at them. And as Mary said before, the antlers, they can't really tell you the age of the deer because it depends a lot on their resources, so whatever they're eating. So it's really hard to tell if they're alive, and you can't take a tooth sample from them. And then Mary answered the question about eating meat from a deer that has tested positive for chronic wasting disease, but we haven't found any positive cases of chronic wasting disease in Rhode Island. So we don't have to worry about that yet, but that's why we're testing to see, keep track of it and make sure we're monitoring it. And if you're interested in volunteering for the check stations, again, that's in November, so feel free to email me with any questions about that, and we can get you on the email list so you can have updates on it. All right, so just jump to our next question so we don't take too long. True or false, white-tailed deer have always been abundant in Rhode Island? All right, getting a mix. It's like 50-50. All right, give it one more second. All right, so answer is false. So we used to always have deer in the state, but when the European settlers came over, they did a lot of damage. They hunted a lot of the wildlife that we had here in the state, and they also removed a lot of the habitat that they needed. So you can see in this image here, this is Rhode Island landscape during European settlement. It is completely cleared. There's very, very few trees, and they're all cleared for farms, for agriculture, or for livestock. And when they did that, they cut down all the forests that a lot of animals need to survive, including deer. So deer didn't have those resources that they needed to survive, and hunting was really big, and they were very heavily hunted. I'll put in the chat, there's this link to the Harvard Forest Landscape History, and that's what this image is from. It's a very interesting website, and it tells you about the changes in the landscape over time in New England, which is really interesting, and that's what this image is from. But when they cleared all that land and when they hunted so heavily, it actually crashed the deer population, and in the early 1900s, there were less than 500,000 white-tailed deer in the entire country, so it really plummeted, and we had to actually stop hunting. So it was actually illegal to hunt deer for a long time because that population really needed to rebound and to grow larger. But once it did recover, they allowed hunting again. They kind of slowly introduced the different types of hunting and allowed different numbers to be harvested. And now they're the most common deer species in North America. So they're doing great now, and we do still allow hunting of deer, and we manage it very closely with our check stations and with gathering data through citizen scientists and through a variety of other techniques. But it's definitely helpful to have hunters involved in management so that our population doesn't get too big, because when those European settlers came over, like I said, they did a lot of damage to a lot of wildlife, including some of the predator species of deer. So things like mountain lions are gone in the state. We used to have them, and they used to be predators of deer, but they're gone. We used to have wolves in the state, but they're all gone. And we used to have bears in the state, and they're pretty much gone, but they're starting to come back now. But because all those predators were wiped out, the population needs control, and it needs hunters to help control that population. And just like Mary was talking about before with conflicts with vehicle strikes and deer getting into gardens, those numbers of those issues are going to increase unless the deer population is managed. So they really do need to be managed because we wiped out all those other predators. Today, we still have a few predators in the state, but they're not as big of predators of deer as we used to have. So coyotes will hunt deer and bobcats, but not really. Like they'll take down younger deer. And same thing with bears. They're not huge predators of deer in the state, but they will occasionally take them down, but usually like fawns or younger deer. So I'll hand it over to Mary to talk a little bit more about managing deer.
Sure. Yeah. So before we jump into this, we just had a couple of questions in the chat that I wanted to quickly just so that because they are related. So one of the questions was what year did they recover? So in 1954 we started a hunting season for deer in Rhode Island. So I'm not sure exactly what year they determined, this is okay, we got too many deer now, we can allow a hunting season, but that was the first regulated hunting season. And you can see that across like American history with wildlife management. You start to see like, completely unregulated hunting, and then turn of the century, we started to see legislation. Late 1800s, early 1900s, people started forming fish and game commissions or natural resource bureaus, starting to see federal legislation to protect wildlife. And then just following that, 30s and 40s kind of ramping up, and then sort of in the 50s was when things started to, I guess, turn over into like more of modern day, where we see it now. But obviously management and science has made leaps and bounds since then. So we're definitely in a better place than we were, in terms of, the habitat reverting back to forest, our populations coming up. So I hope that answers that question a little bit.
And again, like Mary was saying, all of those laws that were put into place in the early 1900s, one of them is the Pittman-Robertson Act of the Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Program, which is what we were talking about before, and that's what allows us to protect land for animals like deer, so that they do have habitat, and that doesn't happen again where all of the forests are cut down and used for agriculture or for livestock. So that's why it's so important to have that contribution from hunters and anglers to help protect that habitat, because it's not just stopping hunting, it's also protecting habitat. That's what made those populations recover.
Yeah. I'm just seeing a question, should more does be taken than bucks? So that's the next slide, so hang tight. So just some of our management goals for deer in Rhode Island, obviously decreasing human deer conflict. So if anybody said, oh, deer's eating my garden, that is a human deer conflict. Also, vehicle strikes. So we have, there's a deer harvest report that we put out every year, and we also summarize, the number of vehicle strikes that occur each year, and it's like astronomical. It's almost as many deer as are being harvested by the hunters. So reducing, trying to bring a population to a steady, stable, sustainable level, that we can hopefully reduce those strikes, because they can be very dangerous for people. So when you have deer crossing the roads,
the other thing about vehicle strikes. So we have a 5-year average for the number of deer harvested and the number of vehicle strikes. And there were 2,000 deer harvested annually over that 5-year average, and 1,000 annually hit by cars. So it's like a ton of deer are hit by cars, and those deer that are hit by cars, they're not used as a food resource. So it's kind of like a waste. It's not getting used at all. All it's doing is causing conflict for humans and killing deer, which is not good. And that's the other reason why it's so important to have hunters involved, because the more deer that are hit by cars, it's just such a huge waste and such a shame that conflict is there. And that's because the population is doing so well, and they're moving into those areas where that conflict is happening.
Right. So along those lines, with decreasing those human deer conflicts, when you have a smaller population, you can hopefully maintain high nutrition and prevent that starvation level. We're saying some deer do starve over the winter, and it's unfortunate, but that happens with every animal in nature. So it's just part of that natural cycle. But when you have overpopulations of a particular animal and there's just not enough resources for them, you start to see those starvation levels peak a little bit more. So we want to, kind of bring down, using hunting as a tool to bring down our population, not to an extremely low level, but low enough that we don't see so many animals, getting hit by cars or starving. Preventing the spread of disease, obviously with chronic wasting disease, is a huge goal for us. Lowering the tick population. So I saw somebody had mentioned in the chat, what about Lyme disease? So deer are the vector for the ticks, the deer ticks that carry Lyme. So when we get the deer in at the check stations, they're crawling with ticks. It's like crazy. So they do harbor a lot of ticks. So hopefully, that bringing that population down just a little bit will hopefully lower that tick population as well. Obviously allowing hunters fresh meat. So Dylan, our deer biologist, actually calculates out the number of meals that are provided based on the deer harvest each year, and then he kind of calculates the number of the pounds of meat that are harvested. So we'll take those weights, the dressed weight of the deer, and kind of get an estimate of how many meals are provided to hunters each year. So that's a way for people to access food in a very natural, sustainable way. We even had a program a few years back, Hunters for the Hungry. So if someone got a deer that, I got enough, in my freezer, they could donate that deer to the Center for Southeast Asians. We partnered with that organization to get food to people in need. So that was a really great way for hunters to give back. And it's a really high, like a nutrient dense, source of protein, very lean meat. And also, to contribute to wildlife conservation. Of course, that's at the core of everything we do. We want to make sure that deer are here to stay on the Rhode Island landscape, not only for hunters, but just, I don't hunt, Gabby doesn't hunt, but we love seeing deer. We love observing them, and they're a part of our ecosystem, and they're important. So we obviously want them here to stay. So I'm going to click to my next slide. Just a little bit about hunting. We won't get like super in depth with this, because if you want to get really in depth, I'm sure we have a bunch of hunters on the call. But if you are interested in getting into deer hunting, I highly recommend checking out our hunting regulations guide before you even get started. So Gabby's going to post that in the chat, and also our hunter safety education program. We've got some great classes, not just for beginner hunters, but our team does a really great job of creating some unique classes that are great for experienced hunters if you want to learn a new skill. So they've got a lot of fun things on the docket. They're a great team at Hunter Ed, so we encourage you to check out their programs. So basically, deer hunting is split into 3 seasons, and the dates, the exact start and finish dates, will vary from year to year. But basically, archery runs from September to January. So that's our longest season. Muzzle loader is only through the month of November, and shotgun is only in December. So I had seen in the chat, we had a question about, so should I, if I'm out hunting and I see a doe, should I take the doe instead of the buck? So there are bag limits that are imposed. So there's zones, exceptions, special rules, bag limits. That's all explained in the hunting abstract. But essentially, basically, our bag limits reflect that you take fewer. Each hunter is permitted to take fewer antlered deer than antlerless deer. So statewide, if you are hunting in all zones, methods combined, you can take 2 antlered deer per season, and that is reduced to 1 in zone 3. So that we want to make sure that we have enough males in the population to continue to reproduce and replenish our population, make sure that's sustainable. So for antlerless deer in zones 1 to 3, you can take, in zone 1, you can take 3 antlerless deer, but in zones 2 and 3, you can take 2 antlerless deer, so it's a little lower. And then in zone 4, which is Block Island, it's unlimited. And the reason for that is because Block Island is very overpopulated with deer. So our management goal for Block Island is to reduce it as much as possible. Because it's out of control there. So we try to look at the zones. So you can see zone 2 is, most of Western Rhode Island. Zone 1 encompasses most of the South Shore and all of our suburban areas and into the Bay a little bit. Zone 3 is Prudence Island. Then zone 2 is way out in the East Bay. So those bag limits are imposed based on the densities of deer and how we want to manage those zones. But essentially, the goal is to make sure that we ensure that we have enough males to continue reproducing.
And I just want to mention that the data that was from survey 123, that's just this 1 year. So we're going to collect data over time too, to see kind of how it changes over time. So that might not be a really accurate reflection of the deer population in the state, but it will be once we have years of data. So all of our management, our rules and regulations, they're there so that you don't have to, try to restrict yourself. We're doing that for you, so you don't have to worry about hurting the deer herd, because we're monitoring the population to make sure it is healthy.
Right. That's hunting in a nutshell. So for more questions on hunting, we encourage you to check out Hunter Ed, because they are the experts. But we wanted to just give a brief overview to give folks a general understanding. Okay, so that's all we have for you tonight. So we're up at, let's see, it's 8:04. So we went a little bit over. So we understand if folks do have to leave, it's a weeknight. We understand, but we're happy to hang out for a little bit if folks have more questions. We encourage you to follow us online if you don't already do. I suspect some of you found out about this program by following our Facebook page and Instagram. But if you do not, we encourage you to check us out. And you can always check our wildlife outreach program page for updates on future events. So we always post, there's a little event calendar there where you can check them out. But we hope that you learned something new, even if you've been hunting deer your whole life, if you've been observing deer your whole life, if you've never seen a deer, which I highly doubt that's possible living in Rhode Island, but we thank you all for coming, and we hope you have a good night.
I'm just gonna, I see a couple of questions. One of them is, how do you contact me? So I'm gonna put my email in the chat so that you can email me if you need to, regarding the volunteer opportunities, and then I can get you on our mailing list so you can see all of the awesome volunteer opportunities that we have, including deer check stations, but that won't be for a while. Again, not until next November. But I did see a couple of other quick questions. I think, Mary, if anyone wants to stay on, we can answer just the couple that we have coming in.
Absolutely.
So I think
Okay.
one of
trying to scroll through, I'm like backlogging.
So a couple of them were about ticks. So one of them is how, I think it was how can hunters prevent getting ticks? One thing that we do when we're doing field work is you can apply permethrin, however you want to say it, to your clothes, and you spray it onto your clothes, not when you're wearing them. You let it dry, and that will kill the ticks on contact. So if a tick gets on you when you're wearing those clothes, your field clothes, the tick will die and fall off. So that's a great way to do it. Just make sure you tuck your pants into your socks, your shirt into your pants, and you're all tucked in, and then the ticks won't be able to climb up your pants. They'll climb up your clothing, so you'll be able to see them sooner. But yeah, that permethrin is great. So I highly recommend permethrin. I used to use it when I worked in very ticky populations, and it's great.
I'm seeing one, who to call if we encounter a deer hit by a vehicle. Yeah, so that would be the environmental police. So Gabby, if you want to toss the number in the chat. So there's a wildlife recovery group within enforcement that will pick up if the deer is already deceased, or if it needs to be euthanized. They're able to take care of that. Okay, so let's see.
Some people in Warren, and they've seen them all the time. Awesome. Someone saw albino deer.
Cool.
Piebald deer, maybe.
Yeah, they can come in some different colors too. Okay, so we're seeing what's the management plan for the Rhode Island deer herd in terms of percentage of carrying capacity. So this is a tricky and complex question. So basically what's happening right now is our deer biologist is actually working on his master's, and his project is focused on trying to get a really accurate estimate and coming up with better methodologies in sampling our deer herd and figuring out like how many exactly are there, because as you can imagine, it's very hard to count animals because they do not sit still. They hide, so it can be pretty tricky. So basically, based on Dylan's data collection over the next few years and his methods, he's working on that management plan to try to figure out maybe we do need to raise bag limits, or maybe we need to lower them. I don't know. It seems that probably we don't need to lower them because we still have a lot of vehicle strikes, and there is an issue also. I'm seeing some comments in the chat that we're seeing fewer hunting license sales, which is true. So fewer people are getting into hunting as well. So the hunters who get out there, and if they fill their tags every year, good for them. But fewer and fewer people are getting into hunting. That can also become an issue. So that's, that's a job for our hunter ed group, to recruit new hunters. And, part of the problem, I think, for a lot of people is, like, I personally do not hunt. I didn't grow up with hunting. I don't have anybody in my family who could have been a mentor for me. So there's a lot of people increasingly, who are in that same situation, who might be like, if I could, I'd like to hunt if I could. Oh, it takes a lot of time, a lot of new skills. I don't know where to even start. It's very intimidating for people to get into it. So we're trying to come up with ways, to create more of a welcoming, environment, and try to hook people up with mentors, so that it's not so overwhelming for people. So that, combined with the science that Dylan is working on, we're hoping to, kind of get a better plan in place, for the years to come.
I see a question about chronic wasting disease. Can anything be done to prevent CWD coming to Rhode Island? So we do have rules in place to try to prevent it from getting into the state. So one of them is that you can't use deer urine. So it can be the prions that cause CWD can be found in the urine. So one of them is that you can't use real deer urine as a scent when you're hunting. Another is that you can't transport certain deer parts between states, because they can also, like the brain, the spinal tissue, the lymph nodes. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think a couple other ones. I would look at the regulations, but you can't transfer those between states, to also try to avoid bringing those prions over into Rhode Island. And then if I can't remember if Mary went really in depth in about this, but those prions can actually live in the soil for a very, very, very long time. So if you dump deer, say from another state that had CWD, and you bring all of the guts and everything over and you dump it somewhere in Rhode Island, and that's going to stay in the soil, and deer can actually pick those prions up from the soil years and years later if they eat in that same spot where it was dumped. So a couple of different rules and regulations that have been put into place to try to prevent that.
Yeah. So if you are transporting deer, and that's not to say, like, so I know people hunt out of state all the time. When you're transporting that, so you have to see a butcher in that state. They butcher the deer, package it up, and it's all labeled and shipped properly. So you can't just, like, put the deer in the back of your truck and drive it home, because that could potentially, contaminate, Rhode Island, and infect our deer. So that's those rules are not to inconvenience people, but really to save our deer population. So I'm seeing another question about salt licks. So salt licks are tricky, because I personally would think it's probably not a great idea to put out salt licks, because CWD is transferred through saliva. So if you've got multiple deer going up and licking that salt block, probably not the best idea. So I would say to avoid them.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's any specific law in place. I'm not sure about that one, but we can get back to you about that.
I always err on the side of caution.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably better. It's probably better not to, just because of that reason.
Yeah.
See if there's anything else.
So we have a question. What about having a longer hunting season in November and December? Archery is longer than firearm. So yeah, that's a great question. So that may be, so I don't have an answer for that question right now. That's something that could be taken into consideration, as we assess our deer population. Maybe we do need to allow, an extended period for different methods of take. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, what time of day are deer most active? So they're what we call crepuscular, so active like around dawn and dusk typically. So really early morning and the evening, you're more likely to see them. The rest of the day, they're kind of just like bedding down, just hanging out somewhere, like under some conifers or in a field.
Yeah. So, I'm also seeing a comment. Salt licks are illegal for hunting purposes as they're considered baiting. Yes, thank you for confirming that. Yeah. So, yeah, but I think, if you're baiting for deer, then that's one. If you're putting it out in your backyard, you're not. Yeah. Assuming you're not sitting out there with your tree stand, like looking down at the deer in your backyard, but it's just something to think about if you're interested in supporting them just in your backyard habitat. Another question, does Fish and Wildlife work with forestry to address overbrowsing by deer so they won't impact forest regeneration? Yes, so where Dylan did a little pilot study with some deer fencing, just some small plots to start with. We'll see where this goes. This is kind of just to get a sense of where we could go with this. But so Dylan did some on state management areas, in, like a randomized area that's, regular mature forest, and then some in forest treatment plots. So whether that was a prescribed burn out at Nicholas Farm, where we burned off a section of the forest to help with pitch pine regeneration, because pitch pine barren is a rare habitat in the state, and it supports a lot of really cool critters, some very unique pollinators, and some reptiles and birds. So that habitat needs fire to regenerate. So we did a prescribed burn there, and so that burned off a lot of the understory. So you're at a blank slate. So let's see what happens if we can put up some fencing to prevent deer from browsing any regeneration. And he also put them out, reached out to some landowners who had done some young forest treatment on their properties. So done, a small clear cut or a selective cut of their property to encourage regeneration of oak and aspen and birch. That supports, not only New England cottontail and American woodcock, which are two species of greatest conservation need in the state, but also 40 species of songbirds. So it's a really great way, if you have property and you're able to do a forest treatment, we encourage you to check that out. There's a great program, Coverts, that we partner with, and you can learn more about how you can create habitat on your property. So Dylan was able to reach out to some of those landowners and do a little study on their land as well to put up some deer fences. So that's kind of the extent of it so far. So I will see where that goes, and see if we decide to fence some more areas. Some general stuff that we do, like when we do selective cutting on the management areas, when we are creating young forest, we'll leave what's called the slash on the ground. So that's the crowns of the trees and all the branches that are not, like regular timber, the trunk of the tree. So all of that slash goes on the ground, and it creates kind of like a mulch. So it's harder for the deer to walk around. It kind of gives some shelter to the little seedlings that are kind of come up, the baby trees. So it gives that level of protection for them. But we also do that to create, to protect soil moisture as well, with the event of, you're opening this space up to a lot of sun, but thinking about climate change and, hotter summers and stuff. So we want to be able to allow that regeneration. So that's, I'm seeing a question. Will Dylan share the findings of his exclosure studies? So yeah, if we end up by doing, a more extensive study, you can expect probably to see some, that's me and Gabby. That's our job. We share all the info with everybody, and we try to highlight those projects. So as that develops, we'll see what we can get for you. So, and Gabby posted the link to the Coverts project. Excellent. That's a really cool project.
Right.
So,
I think we've kept you all here long enough.
It's about 8:15. So well, class dismissed. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your enthusiasm, for your questions, and for all the hunters out there. Thank you so much for your contribution to conservation. We really appreciate it. So take care, everyone. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Mary and Gabby. That was fabulous.
Yes, thank you for hosting us. And yeah, like I said, maybe we'll email you about that, the next program. So we're doing a wildlife solution series. So we just had